The border between China and India is not just a line on a map. It is a long, winding scar left over from history, stretching for nearly 3,500 kilometers through some of the world's most formidable terrain. As of July 2025, this border remains a source of deep-seated tension between the two Asian giants. The core of the problem is that both nations have very different ideas about where the border actually lies. This disagreement dates back to the colonial era and has never been fully resolved. This has led to a situation where soldiers from both countries patrol territory that the other side claims as its own, creating a constant risk of confrontation and misunderstanding. The dispute is primarily concentrated in two main sectors. In the west, there is Ladakh, a high-altitude desert region. Here, China controls a large area called Aksai Chin, which India claims as part of its territory. India, on the other hand, administers Ladakh, which China has historically contested. In the eastern sector, the conflict centers on Arunachal Pradesh, a large Indian state that China claims in its entirety, referring to it as South Tibet. This fundamental disagreement over vast swathes of land means that the border, known as the line of actual control, is a temporary arrangement, not an internationally recognized boundary. The historical roots of this conflict run deep, culminating in a short but brutal war in 1962. China emerged victorious from that conflict, solidifying its control over Aksai Chin. For decades afterward, while the border remained a sensitive issue, a series of agreements signed in the 1990s helped maintain a delicate peace. These agreements established protocols to prevent flare-ups, including rules that soldiers on patrol should not carry firearms. This framework, while imperfect, managed to prevent major military clashes for a long time, allowing both countries to focus on their economic growth and development. However, the peace established by those earlier agreements has always been fragile. Both India and China have spent decades building up infrastructure, such as roads, bridges, and airfields, on their respective sides of the line of actual control. This construction has been a major source of friction. When one side builds a new road or outpost, the other side often sees it as an attempt to change the status quo and strengthen its territorial claims. This has created a security dilemma where defensive actions by one country are perceived as aggressive by the other, leading to a cycle of military buildup and heightened suspicion along the entire length of the disputed border. The precarious peace along the line of actual control was shattered in June 2020. In the Galwan Valley, a barren and remote part of Ladakh, a violent and brutal clash erupted between Indian and Chinese soldiers. This was not a firefight with guns, but a medieval-style brawl fought with fists, rocks, and nail-studded clubs. The confrontation resulted in the deaths of 20 Indian soldiers and at least 4 Chinese soldiers, marking the first combat fatalities on the border in nearly half a century. The incident sent shockwaves across both nations and the world, plunging bilateral relations into their deepest crisis in decades. The Galwan Valley clash was not an isolated event, but the culmination of rising tensions and a series of smaller face-offs that had been occurring for weeks. It triggered a massive military standoff, with both India and China deploying tens of thousands of additional troops, along with heavy artillery, tanks, and fighter jets, to the Ladakh region. The line of actual control, which had been a relatively quiet frontier, was transformed into a heavily militarized zone. The trust that had been painstakingly built over many years was completely eroded, and high-level political and diplomatic contact between the two countries came to a grinding halt. In the years that followed, from 2020 to 2023, the situation remained tense and volatile. Both armies were dug in, often just a few hundred meters apart, in a state of high alert. While military commanders held numerous rounds of talks to de-escalate the situation, progress was painfully slow. A few agreements were reached to pull back troops from specific friction points, creating demilitarized buffer zones between the two armies. However, these were localized solutions, and the broader military buildup continued. The border remained on a knife's edge, with the ever-present danger that a small miscalculation could lead to a much larger conflict. Alongside the military standoff, the conflict had significant economic and political consequences. India, feeling betrayed by China's actions, responded by banning hundreds of Chinese mobile applications, including popular platforms like TikTok, citing national security concerns. The Indian government also tightened its scrutiny of Chinese investments, signaling a major shift in its economic policy towards its neighbor. This deep freeze in relations persisted for years, with both sides refusing to back down from their positions, creating an environment of mutual distrust that made any meaningful dialogue seem impossible. The chill from Galwan had settled in for a long winter. After more than 4 years of a tense and costly military standoff, the diplomatic ice began to crack in late 2024. A significant breakthrough came in October 2024, just before a major BRICS summit. India and China announced a deal to end the military impasse in Ladakh. This agreement was the result of persistent behind-the-scenes negotiations and a shared recognition that the prolonged confrontation was unsustainable. The deal outlined a process for disengagement, allowing both armies to pull back from the immediate face-off points and resume patrols according to a new, carefully managed schedule to avoid future clashes. This initial breakthrough paved the way for the resumption of high-level formal talks. In December 2024, India's National Security Advisor, Ajit Doval, traveled to Beijing to meet with his Chinese counterpart, Foreign Minister Wang Yi. This was the first such meeting in 5 years, marking a crucial step towards normalizing relations. Both sides publicly committed to finding a fair, reasonable, and acceptable solution to the border dispute and agreed to implement the disengagement plan. The talks also focused on rebuilding trust through smaller, confidence-building measures, such as resuming cross-border trade and religious pilgrimages that had been suspended. The momentum of these diplomatic efforts carried into 2025. While the October 2024 agreement had successfully disengaged troops at the front lines, the larger issue of de-escalation remained. Tens of thousands of soldiers and heavy weaponry that had been moved to the border since 2020 was still in place. In June 2025, the defense ministers of both countries met on the sidelines of a regional security conference. India's defense minister, Rajnath Singh, used the opportunity to push for a permanent solution and a clear roadmap to return troop levels to what they were before the 2020 crisis, highlighting the deep trust deficit that still existed. However, the path to a full resolution remains fraught with challenges. The 2024 disengagement deal, while a positive step, is a fragile one. It allows both sides to patrol the disputed areas, which means their territorial claims remain unchanged, and the potential for friction has not been eliminated entirely. The agreement essentially manages the conflict rather than solving it. As of mid-2025, the core disagreements over where the border lies, particularly in Ladakh and Arunachal Pradesh, are as entrenched as ever. The diplomatic dance is a slow and cautious one, with each side carefully measuring every step. The importance of the China-India border extends far beyond the two nations involved. It is a matter of significant global concern. Both India and China are rising powers with nuclear weapons, and any conflict between them has the potential to destabilize the entire Asian continent and disrupt the global economy. For this reason, countries around the world, particularly the United States and Russia, watch the developments on the line of actual control very closely. The renewed dialogue in late 2024 was welcomed by the international community as a crucial effort to reduce the risk of a catastrophic war between two of the world's most populous nations. For India, the border dispute is a matter of national sovereignty and security. The country is determined to defend what it sees as its rightful territory and prevent any further incursions. At the same time, India faces a difficult balancing act. China is its largest trading partner, and a complete breakdown in relations would have severe economic consequences. For China, the border is important for its strategic depth in Central Asia and its control over Tibet. The dispute is also part of its broader geopolitical strategy to assert its influence as a dominant power in Asia, which often puts it at odds with India's own regional ambitions. The recent diplomatic thaw is driven by a mutual desire for stability, even if a permanent peace seems distant. Both New Delhi and Beijing have realized that the massive military deployment is incredibly expensive and diverts resources that could be used for economic development. There is also an understanding that continued hostility benefits no one and only creates opportunities for other global powers to interfere in the region. The goal for now seems to be to manage the rivalry and prevent the border from becoming a flashpoint that could derail their respective national priorities. Looking ahead, the hope for a lasting peace rests on the ability of both sides to build on the recent agreements and move towards a full de-escalation of military forces. The ultimate goal would be to demarcate the border and sign a formal boundary agreement, but this remains a very distant prospect given the deep-rooted historical claims. For the foreseeable future, the relationship is likely to be characterized by a mix of competition and cooperation, a precarious peace maintained through constant dialogue and careful management of a border that will continue to command the world's attention.